Alright, we are talking today about the sum of unit fractions. We're talking about the common fraction and we'll also be using a strip diagram to introduce the fractions. And hopefully my computer doesn't die on me because I'm hiding in my bedroom away from the TV noise. Alright, so I'm going to start with a rectangle, and I'm pretending that this rectangle is a strip of paper. This is the strip diagram. We actually in class used the sentence strips that you can get at a store, but really you could just probably take a regular sheet of paper and fold it or cut it in half. So if you want to pause the video and go do that, you'd probably need about 6 longer rectangles to be able to practice. So let's compare these. If we have just one rectangle, then that is just 1. Okay, and then I'm going to pick up another rectangle here, and we're going to pretend that we fold it in half. Okay, I don't know where that one went. There it is. Okay, so I'm going to do dotted lines, and this is the same thing it does in the book. I'm going to use dotted lines to show where I would fold that in half if I had it. So then this becomes 1 piece out of 2, and same with the other side. 1 out of 2. Now if I take that the same size, and we're working with the same size, what I try to tell the students in class is that if you take the same size, when you're talking about fractions you're using, it's relative to the whole. So if I have half of my rug in my classroom, we talked about how that is not going to be the same size as half of my whiteboard in my classroom. They're completely different sizes. It could still represent half plus a half, but they're not going to be the same size as each other. So when I do a strip diagram, I'm going to fold it in half and then half again. And if you remember when we talked about multiplying, we use the same rule for doubling. That anything times 4 is a double rule. So it's the same here. So 1 over 4. So you folded that paper in half and then in half again. So 1/4. And if you see, 1/4 plus 1/4 is also the same size as 1/2, and that will be important later on. But this is just an introduction, but it's still good to notice patterns, as I always talk about in class. Okay, so I'm going to get the same size rectangle again, and when you fold the paper in half and half and half, then you get eighths. Okay, so I'm going to do my dotted lines as if I were folding it in half. So now the paper would have just gotten smaller. And then 1 sits in half, fold it in half again, and then leave it there. Okay, and then you'll have these fold lines, and then leave it folded. And if you fold it one more time and then open it back up, it's going to be divided in half again. And you're going to have these lines. So I like to draw my fold lines in the same pattern as I would fold the paper. Okay, so instead of trying to make perfectly equal eighths, I will do the half mark and then the quarter mark and then the eighth marks, and that makes my eighths look much better. For the sake of time, I'm only going to write 1/8 one time, but that would be 1/8 plus 1/8 all the way across. Okay, and then in class I also showed them that the thirds family would be a similar pattern, similar but not the same. So what it's gonna, I'm gonna do it over here. So let me go ahead and get all 3 don't know why it won't pick it up. 2, and this is all again the same size as that top whole. So if I divide it into thirds, now this is harder to actually fold, especially, well, it's hard for adults and kids to fold it in thirds, but you can still see the family relationship between, and that's not even very well divided, but 1/3, and I do the same thing when I divide it up. I will first do thirds, and there is a difference between the pattern because the 6th is the thirds divided in half, but then 9ths is the thirds divided into thirds. So the folding pattern is harder, but I do thirds again, and then I divide that into thirds to get my 9ths. And I hope that you're working on this or dividing yours up as well on your paper if you got that many pieces. If not, you can always pause the video and go get some pieces so you can practice this over and over. The more practice you get, the better that you'll get at it. Okay? So it looks like a whole bunch, but let's see if my pattern worked by dividing it to thirds first and then dividing each section 3 times. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It worked. And again, that's a pattern. It works every time. Divide it into thirds and then divide the thirds into thirds. And I get 9 every time. Okay? So one of the things that we've been talking about is how, for example, let's look at this right here. If I have 8 slices of bread in a loaf, and I eat 3 slices of that. These are called unit fractions. Okay, unit fractions. They make up the common fraction. Okay, so that would be 1. And again, I said that I had a piece of banana, or a loaf of bread, and I divide that up into 8 slices, and then I go and eat, or use 3 slices. I guess I could be making some toast or something if I use 3. Okay, so that would be 1/8 plus 1/8 plus 1/8 equals 3/8. So this is my sum of unit fractions. That makes so that I can show that I have 3/8 of the bread, but that means I took out 1/8 and then an eighth again, and then I took out another eighth, and that equals 3 slices out of my 8 slices of bread. So this would be the common fraction. So the common fraction is, I'm going to draw an arrow. So the common fraction would be hasn't done it this whole video. 3/8. 3/8. So 3/8 is my common fraction, and 1/8 plus 1/8 plus 1/8 are the units of that common fraction. Okay, so that way they can just students, so that way you can see, and parents, so that the students can see that the denominator, which is the bottom number, the denominator doesn't change. Thank you. The denominator doesn't change, and we only add across with the numerator. And it is very important that we actually picture something, so that way, like bread or pizza or cake, and picture it, so that way it makes more sense than just throwing some numbers over top of numbers, because eventually the plan would be for you to be able to start, in the years to come, be able to start multiplying and dividing and subtracting with fractions. So let's get the basics down now, and that way we'll just add to it as you grow.